It's over your head.
So good evening. My name is Michael Barrett, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Victorian Historical Society, so I get to work with all these wonderful people. So before we get started with our land acknowledgement and our introduction, I'd just like to be able to thank Lois, Bill, and Nevin for playing music for us tonight. That was really terrific. Ron?
Ron.
Send me a bill, Ron. I have apologies. So I thought I had this nailed down. I just honestly, but I got Nevin. And I know Libby's here with him as well. So anyway, so in order to be able to get started, we will start with our land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the former village of Lakefield is located on Treaty 20. Michi-Sagi territory, and the traditional territory of the Michi-Sagi and the Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Osale, and Georgina Island First Nations. Lakefield Historical Society respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and their honors in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure the health and integrity for generations to come. So, it is indeed our pleasure tonight, and it's great to be able to see so many people here, to be able to celebrate Christmas and Christmas traditions. We have a very, very special guest with us tonight. There is another special guest here too. Nancy Haynes is with us, who was sort of a part of the Lakefield Historical Society until taking a little bit of a break, so it's really great to see you with us tonight, Nancy. So we do have tonight Don Wilcock with us, who grew up in Harwood, and he says he's not a native Peterboroughian. Is that a word? Peterboroughian? So, on the south side of Rice Lake. He went to secondary school in Coburg and came to Peterborough in 1979, the same year I was born, to attend Trent University, where he majored in history, and then after my own heart. From the ancient Greece to the Second World War, with some archaeology tossed in there for good measure. He minored in English literature as well. After getting his BA, his honors BA from Trent, he graduated from Fleming College, postgraduate museum management and curatorship program, and did his internship. I was at the CF Base Board Military Museum, where he's a member of a small team that inventoried the collection and redesigned all the exhibits. For the past 27 years, Don has been a contract worker and permanent staff member at the Peterborough Museum and Archives. He's a longtime volunteer with the Trent Valley Archives, the Peterborough Historical Society, currently its president, the Hutchinson House Museum, the Canadian Canoe Museum. He is a past member and director of the Lakefield Historical Society, which we all should be members of, a volunteer at the Scugog Shores Museum in Port Perry and Lang Pioneer Village. What do you do in your spare time? So he is currently on the board of the newly created Peterborough and County Military Museum, located in the Peterborough Armory. So if you've got enough spare time, we could use you. So Don has given many presentations on Peterborough history topics, like historic walking tours around Peterborough and the Little Lake Cemetery. That's what you do in your spare time. And has published 2 occasional papers by the Peterborough Historical Society. And here it comes, in his spare time. He's working on a couple of interest projects that he hopes to result in books: Dictionary of Peterborough Biography and the History of Canadian Forestry Corps in Britain and France during the First World War. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me the very esteemed Don Wilcock.
Thank you very much. It's nice to have people come out to see me. Now, I'm going to be talking about Victorian traditions, and I'm breaking one right now. The gentleman of the Victorian era would not wear his hat inside. But it's great to wear. Christmas is one of those times that people get together and we kind of take it for granted, I think. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Yeah, kind of take it for granted, and we shouldn't, because in the Victorian period, Christmas wasn't really the same as it is today. It was a little less holiday and a little more work. Businesses didn't close, factories didn't close. We've all seen the movie or read the book, The Christmas Carol. Scrooge was reluctantly letting his staff go for the afternoon at Christmas Day. But even in Peterborough, there were things, the newspapers published on Christmas Day if it was their regular weekly publishing day. People went to work. If I hang out at Hutchison House, and we'd gone through the doctor's records and stuff, and he got called out on Christmas days. You know, if babies didn't wait or people were sick, they'd come to him, and he'd have to interrupt his Christmas dinner and head off. So, few things have changed since that, but we're covering the Victorian period, so there will be some traditions that we don't know about, some that we do, some that we still use. So I hope you enjoy it, and see if the tech works in the 1840s. Christmas has an interesting history. It's been banned a couple of times, and when Oliver Cromwell came to power in England after the English Civil War, he and his Puritan government decided that Christmas was a little too papist and a lot too pagan. A lot of the traditions were based on the Roman Saturnalia festivals and the Norse Yule festivals around the winter solstice. So there was a certain amount of drinking and dancing and fun activities that the Puritans weren't really approving of, so they banned it. The Scots did the same, and it was part of the deal of bringing back their king, and they just said, "Oh, sorry, no Christmas." So the Scots were a little wilier. They celebrated Hogmanay, which is the New Year's. They got away with it. But it wasn't until 1958 that Christmas was a public holiday in Scotland. And in 1974, the New Year's Day and Boxing Day were declared public holidays. We've taken it for granted. Fortunately, the English when they brought back their king, they brought back Christmas. But it never had the same oomph that it had in the pre-Restoration or the pre-Civil War, and even certainly not in the Tudor and medieval period. It was pretty raucous. It wasn't until the 1840s when Charles Dickens started publishing his Christmas stories, and the first one was The Christmas Carol in 1843. That's when things started to get more Christmassy, if you will. He was a social justice advocate, but his stories had a lot of information, and a lot of the information that we have now about what Victorian Christmases were like came from Dickens's writings. But he was emphasizing the fun, and there was usually transformation involved. So the Ebenezer Scrooge is the classic transformation. But in all of his stories, the cricket in the hearth, the chimes, I knew I put them out there for a reason. Battle of Life and the Haunted Man. There's certainly transformation, usually for the better. Of course, Christmas Carol was the one that everybody knew and bought in large quantities, and it's still published. People are still buying it, and dozens of movies have been made, TV shows, etc., adaptations. The chimes and the others are less known. The chimes, the cricket and the hearth did very well, but the last two, not so much. And he was getting a little darker because he was in the Industrial Revolution was really mistreating the lower classes, and he was not happy with that, so he was bringing out some of the darker aspects of the working period by doing these Christmas stories. The last one was published in 1848. And he decided that in his spare time he was going to edit and publish a couple of literary magazines. So, but he did continue the Christmas tradition of stories, but they were short stories in those magazines. Now, plants are very important in Christmas traditions. We've got the English holly and the ivy. Now, they weren't that abundant in Canada, so we had some substitutes. And we've got the high bush cranberry instead of the holly. And we've got, you may notice a few of these pictures, you may recognize the place behind the hearth because they're taken at Hutchison House when we decorate it up. So instead of using holly and ivy, which are English plants, the Canadians tended to use pine branches. There's a few of those around. Spruce tends to shed very quickly, so pine is much better. But they also use things like the pine cones, sumac to get the colors. Cedar branches are very good, actually. And then even dogwood because of its red bark. So you mix them all in and you have decorations. If you happen to be at Hutchison House as of now, you'll see everything is decorated up. Mistletoe, romance, kissing under the mistletoe, etc., etc. That comes from the Norse mythology. The god Baldr was born. His mother Frigg, at the time, decided, much like the Achilles story in the Greek mythology, she cast a spell on him so that he was immortal. He couldn't be killed by any weapon made from that grew from the land. Well, that sneaky little guy Loki made a mistletoe, either an arrow or spear. There's some discussion, but mistletoe grows in trees. It's a parasite. It does not grow out of the land. So that spear or arrow inevitably killed Baldr. His mother, instead of going on a rampage like a lot of gods would do, she decided that she was going to, anybody who passed under a mistletoe, she would give a kiss, because she wanted it to become a peaceful plant instead of a warlike plant. And so that is one of the pagan things that never really passed out, because it's a good result. So that's where the tradition of hanging mistletoe in doorways and hallways and stuff came. We also have a similar thing, a kissing bough or a kissing ball. And there's, oops, new clicker. There we go. This is the kissing ball or kissing bough in action, if you will, depicted there. They tended to be made in the round shape. Some of them, the balls often started with an orange or a pear or an apple, and then they built around it. But so I was very glad to see there's no mistletoe hanging around in the legend. Victorians tended not to use wreaths. We think of wreaths on doors and in windows and stuff, very common, but they didn't use the wreath. The wreath came in sort of the turn of the 20th century as a popular decoration. They used sprays, and I have no idea where the name came from. It's probably Norse or Old English or something. But what they are is they just take some branches, green branches, again the same things, the dogwood or sumac, etc., and just tie them all together. Usually there'd be a little wire or string, tight string to tie everything together, and then you add a nice festive ribbon. This one is an outside one, it's hanging on the outside of a door, and this is in the window, so it's really for viewing inside, because if you see it, the panes it's in the middle, you can't really see it. So that was you could hang them from light fixtures, you could hang them from doorways, etc. And they just added things, and they also, cedar smells nice too, so in a Victorian house, it might not be that fresh. Christmas tree. Christmas trees didn't really, well, they were a German tradition, and they didn't come inside. The idea was you would decorate your tree with edibles, popcorn, fruit, nuts, that kind of thing, hanging from the branches, and that way you were sharing your good fortune with the animals and nature. Queen Charlotte, George III's wife, who was also German, she introduced the idea of the Christmas tree to Britain, but it was actually Queen Victoria and Prince Albert who popularized it in the 1840s. And it's probably this picture. This was an etching that appeared in the London Illustrated News in 1848. This was the family decorating their tree and enjoying it. The story goes that Albert wanted to give his fairly new bride a really good present for the first year they were married. And so he and one of his foresters, they sneaked out into the Windsor Great Park, cut down a 40-foot fir tree. I don't know how you sneak it even into Windsor Castle, but nevertheless, he managed to get it in, set it up in the grand ballroom, decorated it. Victoria must have been on a trip or delivering another child or something like that. But anyway, he decorated it all up, and then Christmas morning, he opened the door of the ballroom, and that was her present. That was a few years earlier than this. It was this picture, though, because there are children around, that really set it off. And of course, anything that the royal family does, everybody else has to do. The Christmas tree didn't really make it into this side of the Atlantic until the mid to late 1850s. People were still going with the simple decorations. Some people, if you didn't have a 40-foot ceiling, you'd have a little tabletop, and that's 1898. Decorations would be homemade, paper, little metal ones with punch holes and things. This one, you'll notice that the tree here, the fire marshal would be really upset. These special little candles in their little holders. Nobody would leave them going. In fact, they often didn't light them. But they certainly wouldn't leave them going if there was nobody in the room. But you see, things like they would bake hard cookies and things like that and hang them. And then the children would probably snitch them off when nobody was looking. Simple decorations. A lot of notice there was a paper chain on the back table there. That kind of thing would be popular. And again, the fruit and nuts and popcorn, that kind of thing. But there were some special decorations that you would make out of fabric or heavy paper, and these are cornucopias. Cornucopias were very popular in the Victorian era. They were the sign of life and giving and the earth and whatnot. So these are very special little decorations. Food. What's Christmas without food? I think most of our food traditions can be blamed on or appreciated by the Victorians. The goose. How many of you have had a goose for Christmas? Yeah. A few, yeah. It's kind of flipped over, although the price of turkeys these days. You notice that in the Victorian period, all the descriptions of dinners, Dickens and the other contemporary writers, people are having a goose for their Christmas dinner. Except at the end of the Christmas Carol, you'll notice when Scrooge is hollering out his window for the little boy to go down to the butcher shop, he was ordering him to get that big turkey in the window. A turkey would be expensive because it would be the flip. Now it's kind of the turkey is the common bird and the goose is the special bird. But in those days, the turkey was known by some as the American bird because it was native to this continent. So they would be either shipped over and raised, presumably. They didn't have freezers, so you'd ship them over and raise them there, but they would be more expensive than the geese. So common folk, the Cratchits had a goose. Scrooge ordered the turkey. We've got the traditional Christmas pudding, steamed pudding, and then steam it, boil it, steam it, bake it. Now, not everybody, especially in the city in London, had an oven. So on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, bakeries would shut down, but they would open up for the public. And for a couple of pence, you could go in and you could bake you could roast your goose, but you could also bake your pudding. So it had that hard shell. It wasn't kind of spongy like the boiled pudding. And then it would be presented at the table, usually with a dose of brandy and a match. So you get the flambe effect. But again, you've got holly and ivy, traditional plants, stuck in the top. It'd be like a duff, and so it would be heavy, dense batter with raisins, currants, peel, chopped fruit, that kind of thing. Now we had some special treats. You've got gingerbread, which again was a German tradition, molasses cookies essentially. So these ones are plain, but some people decorated theirs with an icing or sugar. Dried fruit, nuts, etc. Were a special treat. And then you've got sugar plums. Does everybody know what a sugar plum is? It's a plum covered in sugar. Originally they were very expensive and therefore only used by the aristocrats, the nobles, etc., because sugar was very, very expensive, but it was also very laborious because you coated it and then you dried it, made it hard, and then you coated it again. It was called panning. So you'd have a plum or another piece of fruit, and you gradually build up the hard sugar coating. But by the 1840s, 1850s, mechanization had come to candy making, so they were more readily available to the common folk. So in the poem, like Clement Moore's poem, The Night Before Christmas, the sugar plums were dancing in their dreams, in the children's dreams. But 100 years before that, they wouldn't have been able to afford sugar plums. Another one is oranges, and oranges were again shipped in. They weren't just grown everywhere. They were shipped in from Spain and Morocco and the Mediterranean states, provinces. And in Canada, it took even longer. You had to make your order September. The dry goods store, the grocers would send out a notice that they were taking orders for oranges. And you would go down to the store, make your order, pay your money, and then the shopkeeper would gather together all the orders, and then you would make an order in September, October, and they would arrive just before Christmas, all shipped in. And you'd get a notice in the paper, and the word would spread around that your oranges are in. And hopefully they were in decent shape. So we have this one. These are pomanders. Pomanders were more of a decoration than an eating thing. They're actually the little dark bits are cloves. You just stick them into sort of in lines or just sporadically into the orange, then leave them in a dish, sitting on a table, and make the room smell very nice. And if you wanted to make full use of them, you ate the orange before it shriveled up and dried out. But pomanders are they're an interesting. They're really fun. A lot of kids, the kids would use those. They would be the ones to bake them because you can't muck it up. Christmas cards. Guess we won't see many of them this year. The first Christmas card was this one. Again, it was 1843. 1843 was a real Christmas year by the sounds of it. This was Sir Henry Cole, who was better known as the founder of the Victorian Albert Museum. He was a philanthropist, a businessman. He was what we would call an A-lister or an influencer. And every year he received piles of letters. The tradition was to write letters at Christmas time. And he got piles of these, but he was a busy man, and he couldn't get all the letters returned, answered. And that was a faux pas in the Victorian era, is not to answer letters. So he said, okay. He had the friend J.C. Horsley, who was an artist, went and an illustrator. He went to him and said, "Listen, I got this idea. This is the picture that he described. Horsley brought it into reality, and then Cole took the plate to a printer, had 1,000 cards printed off, and if you look closely, it just says to, and then you fill in the name, so it's personalized. It's an answer to the mail, but the Merry Christmas and stuff is everybody gets the same thing. He had 1,000 of these made up on stiff card and sent them all out. Part of his problem was that the year before, the British postal system had brought in the 1 penny stamp, which meant that you could send mail anywhere in England for 1 penny. So everybody was taking advantage of this, and consequently he got even more mail in '43 than he had in other years. So, but it also meant that he could send out 1,000 of them very cheaply. So that's the first. And he thought that was a heck of a good idea in 1843. He kept sending them out, and other people got the same idea, mostly as recipients, started to send them out. Printers were really happy. These are later Victorian cards, the three at the bottom. I'm not sure if they're Canadian or not, but they very well could be. They're certainly depicting Canadian winter sports. The skating, outdoor skating, the sledding, the snowshoeing. Snowshoeing was a very big thing in the winter in Canada, especially Peterborough had a snowshoe club in the 1870s, 1880s, right up to around 1900. But these three sports were very popular because they were acceptable co-ed activities. Men and women could do them together and not be suspected of nefarious purposes. Monkey business, yes. Although I have a feeling there was probably a little monkey business going on. But that was, parents certainly wouldn't hear about that. In fact, the Sanford Fleming, in his diary of 1847, he notes that after the Christmas dinner, he and a bunch of his young friends went out to what's now Jackson Park and skated. That was their afternoon activity. Both girls and boys. Peterborough was not behind the times. Stockings and gifts. Generosity has always been part of the Christmas, the giving, even with the so-called pagan. There's always an exchange of something. Stockings are something that we still have, although things have gotten a little more elaborate. These are, you may recognize again, the fireplace, the hearth at Hutchison House. These are actually just ordinary actually they're thigh stockings. And the bigger the stocking, the better the prize. So the story goes back to the 4th century AD and in Turkey with a guy named St. Nicholas, or Bishop Nicholas. In those days, if girls didn't have a fortune or a dowry, they were married off to whoever offered the most. And so there was a man with a single father with 3 daughters, all coming up to marriageable age. and they were getting offers from unsuitable characters, and they were not happy with that. So, but they couldn't do anything about it. So Nicholas heard about this, and he, middle of the night, he's sneaking around. He's not as creepy as it sounds. And now there's two stories. One that he threw them through the window. Another one he threw them down the chimney. But he had a bag of gold each time that one of the girls came up, marriageable age, and he tossed it through the window or tossed it down the chimney. And the common practice was to dry your stockings after they'd been washed in front of the fire. Well, somehow I guess there was a bounce on those bags of gold or something, and they ended up in the stocking. And so the next morning they came down, and there was a dowry, so they didn't have to marry the unsuitable characters. This happened 3 times, and the father was he was starting to get a little suspicious as to what the heck was going on and who this person was. Finally, he waited up, and he caught Nicholas on the 3rd try, the 3rd daughter, and he asked him, "Don't tell anybody this." He wanted to keep it low key, but the father was so happy that he couldn't hold it in, and that's how the story got out. So that's why, from that point on, people were hanging stockings in the chimney, hoping that there would be gold landing in. And that's also where the tradition of finding an orange in the toe of your stocking comes from. It's the bag of gold. It's as closest to gold as we're going to get. So this we have some artwork of children hanging their stockings on Christmas Eve in expectation of perhaps getting something in. Sometimes the only present they would get would be a new pair of socks, or a knitted hat, or mitts, or something like very functional. And nowadays we get Game Boys and whatnot. But I still have been known to give knitted presents. And now we get to that figure, Father Christmas, St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus. So we have Father Christmas is an interesting character back then, or actually earlier. He comes again from the British folklore source. He was a bit of a rowdy and a ruckus character. Sort of like the ghost of Christmas Past in the Christmas Carol, who was the partier and sitting there with a glass in his hand, this kind of thing. Father Christmas was more like the sort of the jolly old elf type thing, but he was a bit of a trickster, prankster. You've got him as a woodsman. He's most commonly portrayed as a woodsman. So, but by the time Victorians came along, their sensibilities were a little less rowdy, and so they were using Father Christmas, but they were kind of blending him into our Bishop Nicholas, who was kind and gentle and patron of children, as well as sailors and merchants. So they figured he's a better character, but they didn't want to lose the British folklore, so they kind of blended them together. And then you came across the Atlantic in 1823. You had the Night Before Christmas, or A Visit from St. Nicholas, that poem. And the illustrator was Thomas Nast. And he went a little crazy. And this is, oops, wrong button. There we go. So this is the character that he came up with, and the idea of the description in the poem gives the red coat, the white beard, the black boots, and the belly that we think of as Santa Claus now, but he was still being called St. Nicholas. A little different than the bishop in his robes. So in 1881, this picture appeared in the Harper's Weekly magazine, the 1st of January, again by Nast. And so that's really what popularized the idea of Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas. By this time, he was actually calling him merry old Santa Claus. It was still Saint Nicholas or Father Christmas in Britain, and Saint Nicholas mostly in Europe as well. However, it was 1930s when Coca-Cola Company ran a whole series of Christmas ads with this jolly old fellow. Again, sort of taking from the mass pictures, but modifying it a little bit. And of course, he's marketing. So that's sort of the transition from Father Christmas to Santa Claus. And Sinterklaas was a Dutch character in their folklore, mythology, etc. And so he was brought to New Amsterdam, what's now New York, by the Dutch settlers there, and so it's kind of blurred in with these two to make Santa Claus, Sinterklaas. Nobody can pronounce Sinterklaas, so. Now, Boxing Day. This is what I'm going to be doing on Boxing Day. Boxing Day is the 26th of December. It's now known mostly as a sporting day, and with all kinds of games and things being played. It's also St. Stephen's Day. St. Stephen was the patron saint of horses. So consequently, any excuse for the British to ride to the hounds or to have a horse race, anything to do with horses, that was the day, because this is the patron saint's day. So it gradually evolved into a sporting day with riding to hounds, and that's kind of been modified with the laws against actual fox hunting. But also horse racing and rugby in Britain, soccer or football. On this side of the Atlantic, it's the opening day for the Junior World Hockey Tournament, and this year it's in Ottawa, so in the Ottawa area. So I will be sitting there in my TV, possibly in my jammies, watching the early game. The good thing is this year we don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch the game from Finland. The other thing is the word Boxing Day. There's two options, and you can take your pick. One is that St. Stephen's Day was traditionally the day that the churches opened up the alms boxes that were hopefully filled up at Christmas, and then the money was distributed to the poor. The other one was the Victorian tradition of noble families or upper class families gathering up all their, as we would call them, gently used clothing and objects, and boxing them up and taking them down to poor shelters and workhouses, or to distributing to their servants. And the other one was that the servants often became, one of the traditions for that was the servants became the masters of the house for the day, sort of king for a day. So I think they did that on Downton Abbey in Syria, if I remember right. But so that's the idea of Boxing Day. It never really caught on in the States, but it's very popular in the Commonwealth and Britain and very Victorian part of the Empire. I think the Americans just go shopping, except if they're hockey fans. Now, because you called Hutchison House to get me here, Diane, I'm going to go Scottish on you. Scots have their own traditions. They, as I mentioned, they celebrate New Year's as their big party day and celebratory day. Christmas Day for the Scottish Presbyterians is a quiet day. You go up, maybe open a present or two, go to church in the morning, and then your Christmas dinner would be at lunch at noon. That was also popular in Britain. depending on how long the lineup was at the communal bakery to get your goose cooked and your pudding baked. But the Scots, their idea was the 31st of December was a work day, and they just worked. They cleaned everything. They made sure all their debts were paid. That was the only day of the year that their working hearth would be out. You get doused, and all the ashes were removed and cleaned out, and then the stones were scrubbed, and a new fire was laid. And depending on how cold it was, they either lit it right away, or else they waited for the first footer to come in. So we have the hearth going, and there's tradition of children going around the community and singing songs, sort of like Halloween. It's a bit later on, but and I'm not going to try the Scottish pronunciation of that, but the idea is you notice that give your white bread. White bread was a rich person's bread. The common folk had the what we call whole wheat that we don't pay extra for. But that if they have one day a week or one day a year that they could have the white bread, then it was a treat. And the cold, feet are cold, shoes are thin. Give me cakes, scones or special Christmas cakes, and let me come in and warm my cold feet by the fire. Imagine horrid little urchins come to your door and everybody expects to be in. I'm sorry, I've just cleaned the hearth and the fire's not lit. There's also the first footer, which was the first visitor allowed in the house. Was best to be a dark-haired man, preferably with either prospects or some wealth already. And they would be bringing a tray carrying salt and fuel, either coal or a log, and possibly a little beverage, but and a clootie dumpling or a black bun, which represented, so you had salt, food, fuel, so you were going to have a good year. That was good luck. Redheads need not apply. In Scotland, redheads were seen as the Kirk, the strict regulated rules of the Kirk deemed red hair as the color of the devil. Possibly because a lot of Vikings who tended to raid Scotland in the 9th and 10th and 11th centuries tended to be red-headed, and if you saw a redhead coming, he was probably carrying a battle axe and a shield, and he would not be a welcome guest. Women also, sorry ladies, women also were not allowed to be first footers. But anyway, this is the traditional tray that Hutchison House uses for their first footing. So we've got the beverage. It's not single malt, guys. It's Grant's, but it's decent. We use a little birch log it's got a ribbon on it, and it gets tucked away safely after Hogmanay, so that it doesn't accidentally end up in the hearth. And the clootie dumpling, and the little cellar of salt there. So, first footing. Again, live action? No. The first footer comes to the door, knocks on the door, accompanied by a piper, so he really doesn't need to knock. And then the door opens, and the homeowner, you might recognize the guy in this picture, greets them, and then there's a toast waiting for him. And it's not just paying the piper, you pay the first footer too. And so then the toasts. Now, being a first footer can be dangerous because they tended to be, especially in Scotland, the same person would do a whole block. In 1848, no, yeah, 1848. William Hutchison, who was Dr. John and Martha Hutchison's oldest son, he had gone with his father and his younger brother James to Scotland in 1843 and had stayed and gone to school and whatnot. He was killed in a first footing accident. He actually fell over the pier in Kirkcaldy, Scotland, at the bottom of the street. There was no autopsy or anything. We don't know if he had a blood alcohol limit or not, but there is a suspicion that alcohol may have been involved when you just fall over the pier and into the harbor. But so it's not all a happy time, but if you do it right, it's a good time. However, there are some hogmanay when a kilt just doesn't cut it. This is our late regular piper at Hutchison is Colin Campbell. And there was one year he just couldn't wear his kilt, so he wore his trews. And his trews are the tartan pants, the tartan trousers under his rather luxurious cape. He had a problem. He's holding his pipes, not playing them, because it was too cold for the pipes to work outside. So he had to bring them in and do his piping inside. But anyway, that's one of the hazards of Canadian hogmanay. Not so much in Scotland, but certainly a Canadian. Food is an important part of the hogmanay tradition. The four main tools. You've got the haggis, you've got the knife and the inspiration, you've got a piper, and you've got Robert Burns's poem, The Address to the Haggis. I'm not even going to try that either, because my Lowland Scots is actually just barely worse than my Gaelic. But anyway, this is the haggis is the chief of puddings, the king of puddings. It's actually very good. For those of you who are saying, ooh, haggis. They don't use the leftover animal bits anymore. It has to be prime cuts that the food inspector would approve of. Anyway, so it is brought out steaming, and presented to the addresser. And this is the presentation. Now, there are two ways to address the haggis. Some people say there are three, that one of them is to put it in a box and mail it somewhere. But there is the reverential look, serious look, where you're addressing it. It's almost like a prayer to the haggis. Then there's the enthusiastic. Some of our addressers get really enthusiastic with the knife. No blood so far, but there have been a couple of close calls. But so they recite the poem and follow through the motions, and you end up with a badly skewered haggis that ends up being dished out to the crowd on little crackers and oatcakes and stuff. So these are some of the reasons that I go to hogmanay. Then we get the special treats. We have the Scotch eggs. That's a whole one, and we quartered them. Actually, we cut them in 6, because otherwise we would be making dozen. I think one year we made 6 dozen of the eggs, and there weren't any left. So they're actually a hard-boiled egg, rolled in flour, and rolled in sausage meat, breadcrumbs, and then little egg yolk on top, brushed on, and then deep fried. No calories. That's why we cut them into 6. You don't need a whole egg. One of my favorites, though, too, is the potted salmon. And that one, there's no calories in that either. It's salmon with parsley, chopped up parsley mixed in, and then mixed into melted butter. And you leave it overnight to harden, and then scoop it out onto, again, crackers and bread and stuff. Very rarely do we have any of that left over for the volunteers. Then you go down to the traditional, the shortbread. Around it is, in this case, is pieces of black bun, which is next door. The black bun is like a fruit cake wrapped in pastry and baked in a loaf pan. And the flakier the pastry, the harder it is to cut up because it just crumbles. But the ideal thing is you cut it up, and this is our demo tray. You cut it up, but you leave a chunk of it to show you what it looked like before it went out of the knife. And then I mentioned the clootie dumpling for the first photo. This clootie dumpling is a boiled pudding that's baked to give it a bit of a crust. But again, it's currants, raisins, peel, that kind of thing. It's actually really good with molasses, etc. So I'm a volunteer at Hutchison House, so I say that the Peterborough Museum, they pay me. Hutchison House, they feed me. And what's a holiday celebration without a little Highland dancing? And this is one of the Ardmore School of Public Scottish dancing. Very energetic. You gotta have to work off all the food some way. I do not try this. And that is it. So Nancy Wake didn't come out with the hook. I don't know if anybody has questions, comments. I'm not a complete Victorian Christmas tradition expert, but I might have a few answers if you have questions. Or not.
I don't have a question. I have a statement.
Okay.
Right. My wife and I were these guys are so loud about it. Everybody can hear me?
No.
My wife will hear me. Anyway, we were in Cuba after a trip. We went way out in the country on a trip, and we come to that farm place that probably selected by the bosses where we should go because it was a high beautiful place, farm. And anyway, the reason I saw this is because these stockings hanging on it. Well, the farmer said, okay, the first we're going to give you a taste of really good sugar. So here you had 3 pieces of sugar cane about this long, and we cranked it through that pristine crunch. And sure enough, we got probably a good almost a quart of juice just as low. Now he's doing, did anybody like the coffee? Yes, I would, sir. This is with that sugar. So he went to these along the corner, picked up salt. He put a whole bunch of chewed up coffee down that. I made up over a quart of water down to the salt. And add a little bit of sugar to it. It was already sugar. It was hot, and it was real natural, really good. I don't know whether.
It was actually pantyhose.
Thank you, dear. Just remember the pantyhose here. It looked like that too, by the way. Right? Thank you, sir. This is one of my students, by the way. That's great.
Probably grade 3. It was a magical land back then. The lake's on its own.
One of the other traditions I didn't talk about was the wassail and the mulled wine. The mulled wine was heated up, usually with some fruit and stuff in it. There was one was Bishop's stew, which was wine that was infused through oranges and then boiled up and all kinds of spices and stuff with it. And the wassail was something, again, the tradition going from house to house, singing carols and expecting to be given a glass of wassail. Again, another one of those traditions that might have a sad ending.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Thank you very much. Big round of applause. Thank you. And on behalf of the Victorian Historical Society, Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming up tonight as well. I might get you to help me pull a 50-50 draw here, because that way you're probably the honest person in the crowd. So, and you don't have a ticket. And I know Anne at the back, who is selling the tickets and helping out tonight. Thank you, Anne. She really wants her number picked. So there is, the jackpot is $55. Where's Maureen? Maureen, you're not winning.
Let me get to the door for a fast exit if that's the case.
Okay. I know her ticket numbers, so. I don't think so, Anne. So the last three numbers are 086. You'll pick another one.
Oh my goodness. 5096.
There you go. I'd also just like to say a special thank you to Diane and Sally today, who came in early this afternoon and helped to be able to decorate, move the tables all up while I was, having an afternoon nap. Appreciate that. And so I really do thank both of you for all of your work. And on behalf of the, did you want to say a few words before it? Okay, then I'm not going to say anything. I'll let you continue next, Mike.
I was just reading what Diane was telling me to do.
I know. When did you ever have a meeting when I didn't want to say something? That's okay. So just a couple of things. We talked about English traditions, and we didn't talk about French traditions very much. And it just reminded me, having a French Canadian background, the king for the day idea was really a French tradition. And what you did is you baked a pudding, and you put a bean, or sometimes a stone in one of the things, and then the person who got that bean or stone was king for the day. And everybody had to do what they said. They were basically slaves. And it comes from one of the French kings, Louis the 14th, 15th, started the tradition. And it was supposed to be that the king would get, of course, the bean. But somebody changed the orientation of the pie, and he didn't get it. So one of his groomsmen got the bean and was very officious. In fact, when the king tried to speak to him, he boxed his ears. And the king was, of course, embarrassed, and they thought, wow, this means an execution tomorrow. But the king goes, no, you're absolutely right. He won king, he was king for the day. And tomorrow, don't think that you're going to do that again. But he held true to the tradition. This is our last meeting of this year, of course, and we don't meet in the wintertime for convenience sake, really, for people coming at night and for the weather. So our next meeting will be in March next year, March the 27th. That's the last Thursday of the month. Elwood Jones will be talking from Trent Valley Archives about his latest book. And the title of that escapes me, but we'll have information come out before that meeting. And